I think for me, it's just encouraging parents to be really mindful in how we speak and approach adoption. And I talk a lot about, Brene Brown calls it holding the tension. So two conflicting feelings or emotions or truths. Both can be true at the same time, but we're also holding space for both. So my goal is to encourage parents that adopt transracially or adopt in general to celebrate the joys and the beauty in adoption, but also acknowledge the grief and loss experienced by adoptees and birth parents. So I think that's just my goal.
Your dream is to become a mom. My dream is to help you get there. I'm Rebecca Greenspan, a single mom through domestic adoption and an adoption consultant for over a decade. I'll be your guide, along with other adoption professionals and members of the adoption constellation, walking you step by step down this beautiful and complex path of adopting your baby. When I was going through the adoption process, I had no idea what I was doing, what I needed to know, or more importantly, who to trust. Well, after helping hundreds and hundreds of families grow through the beauty and complexity of adoption, I've learned more than a thing or two, and let me tell you, it's not always rainbows and butterflies. This isn't just another podcast sharing adoption stories, but it's for you if you're genuinely committed to diving in with an open heart, eager to learn everything there is to know about adopting a baby so that you can show up for yourself and your child in the best way possible. This podcast is for you if you're ready to put your newfound knowledge into action. Adoption isn't for the weak of heart, and it certainly isn't done when your baby gets placed in your arms. If that's what you think, I'm afraid you're living in la la land. My promise to you is to keep it real if you promise to keep digging. We'll acknowledge the hard, and we'll also celebrate the joy that is adoption. You ready? Let's do this. Welcome to the Adoption Roadmap Podcast. I'm your host, Rebecca Greenspan, and today our special guest is Ramya Gruneisen. Years ago, I heard Ramya speak on a panel, and I knew I wanted her to share her story with my community, which she has graciously done now numerous times, so I know you're in for a treat today. Ramya is an international transracial adoptee adopted from India in 1995. Coming from a blended family with an older sister who's a domestic adoptee and two younger siblings born to her parents, Ramya brings a unique perspective to the table. With a passion for sharing her story and using her voice, Ramya's mission is to help agencies as well as hopeful and adoptive parents skillfully navigate the intricate journey of adoption. She works closely with the National Council for Adoption, has shared her insights in many publications, and is a sought-after speaker. So we are lucky to have her. But Ramya doesn't only spend her days educating people about adoption. Her day job is at the United States Committee for Refugees and Immigrants, USCRI, which she is equally passionate about, and in her free time, climbs mountains and cheers on the St. Louis Cardinals. Ramya, welcome to the Adoption Roadmap Podcast, and let's just jump right in. What sparked your interest in educating people about adoption?
Yes, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here. Yeah, that's a great question. I was actually reflecting on that because it's been about 4 years since I entered this field. I actually never thought that I would be an adoptee doing education and advocacy work, but it's really interesting. It actually all started about 4 years ago. I was on Facebook and there was a couple that I knew that were adopting from India. And it was just really interesting watching them navigate their adoption kind of journey on social media. And they had started a GoFundMe and they were sharing a lot of what I deem personal information about their daughter who they were adopting. And I felt really triggered, honestly, because as an adoptee from India, I was like, this just doesn't, something about this doesn't sit well with me. And I just opened my laptop and I started writing. And it started with a pretty abrasive article that I titled, Why Adoption is Not for You. And I had no intention of sharing it publicly or sharing it with the world. It was more just an experience of putting down thoughts on paper. And for me, I've always found that journaling is very healing and cathartic for me. And I remember sending it out to my family, and my dad just was like, you need to share this with people. People need to know this. This is really important. And I think he was the first person that really empowered me to use my voice. Mm-hmm. And so we edited it and kind of made it a little less abrasive. And I ended up sending it out to a few agencies. I quite literally just Googled adoption agencies and sent them this article and was like, hi, I'm Ramya. I'm a transracial adoptee. This is what I want people to know. And was just incredibly well received. And it was published by dozens of agencies across the US. And then all of a sudden, I kind of realized there's a space for my voice and I have something to say and people want to hear it. So 4 years later, I'm speaking at national conferences, doing podcasts. And the agency I am adopted from, I'm actually speaking at their largest gala in October. They're flying me down to Texas. So there are moments it feels very surreal that this is happening. And I tell everyone it's my life-giving side hustle. Yes, I work full-time in public health. Yeah.
What was the article? What was the essence of the article that you wrote?
Yeah, so I basically was just encouraging parents to be really careful in how they talk about adoption and how they navigate adoption, and especially Christian families, white Christian families. It was just kind of like, okay, here are things you need to know. Here are the experiences of those that are adopted. And I essentially just summarized it into, I don't know, a few bullet points, why adoption is not for you, like really encouraging parents to be introspective and sit in humility prior to adopting. So
yeah. And do you find, because I know you've written a lot since then. Thanks for sharing that. And first of all, how cool is that you, number one, we send journals to all of our families when they start, as a way not only to, journal for themselves, but also for their future child to share that with, because what a beautiful thing, hopefully, to share with your child later. I love that your father was so encouraging of you to share that with the world, because he could have gone the other way, and that you felt comfortable enough, which says a lot about your parents. And I know, and just the reception that you've gotten from the community, the adoption community at large. So how amazing. What a strong place to start in our conversation. I know you've gone on to write a lot for a lot of people since then. And is that still your message overall, or what else do you want to expose prospective adoptive parents to, and, in their experience?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say, I think my goal is to be an adoptee in this space, encouraging hopeful and adoptive parents on all the intricacies and nuances of transracial adoption. I feel very strongly that I can only speak from my lived experience.
Thank you.
I've had agencies ask me to speak about, can you write about birth parent experiences? Or just certain aspects of adoption that I am not deeply or directly connected to. And so I really try to only inhabit a space that is mine to take up. And so I think for me, it's just encouraging parents to be really mindful in how we speak and approach adoption. And I talk a lot about, Brené Brown calls it holding the tension. So two conflicting feelings or emotions or truths. Both can be true at the same time, but we're also holding space for both. So my goal is to encourage parents that adopt transracially or adopt in general to celebrate the joys and the beauty in adoption, but also acknowledge the grief and loss experienced by adoptees and birth parents. So I think that's just my goal. And also to just show parents that we can do adoption well. Yes, we have done adoption poorly, but we can do adoption well. So how can I equip and sustain you for the journey of adoption?
Thanks. That's so beautiful. Okay. I'm about to open up be totally transparent here for all you listeners. This is the second time Ramya and I are recording this conversation, because the last time we did, after an hour-long interview, I realized that I never pressed the record button. And thank goodness it was with Ramya, because she is so gracious and so beautiful and has such a good soul that she agreed to come on. But it was, so it's been months later. And the reason I one of the other reasons I bring this up is because Ramya and I had a discussion about exactly what she just shared, which was a really good lesson and a really good aha for me. You know, as much as we pride ourselves at RG Adoption Consulting of honoring and respecting the triad. In fact, we just created t-shirts that say honor the triad. And I've never seen anything out there like that. But when we post a congratulations post of a family that just adopted, which we want to do, we want to give that family a moment to celebrate. We want to give that child a moment to be celebrated. And we also need to honor and just give voice to the loss and the trauma that also just happened as a result of this beautiful thing for this family. And you gave me such beautiful words to use in our posts, which we now do on all of our adoption posts. So thank you for that. And thank you for giving me the words. Yeah. So working with adoption agencies and speaking at conferences must expose you to a variety of perspectives and experiences, and frankly, just being on social media. Can you recall a time maybe when you were speaking or, you know, at a conference where you encountered a perspective that challenged or shifted your views on adoption, like what you shared with me?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know that it was a singular moment. I think one of the things that's been really interesting as I continue to navigate this space is there are so many stories like mine, and there are so many adoptees, transracial, international transracial adoptees specifically, that were adopted in the 80s and 90s that have had really, really hard adoptions. And I didn't really realize just the hurt of so many members in the adoption community, specifically adoptees. And so it's been really interesting, especially now with just the age of social media, where we can give platforms for people to share their stories, to also acknowledge that there's been a lot of trauma from adoption agencies and from prospective and adoptive parents towards adoptees. And there are so many adoptees that are hurt. And I think it's something that I've just had to sit with myself, because I have trauma, and I've done a lot of work in therapy to work through complex developmental trauma associated with my story. But there are so many adoptees that disagree with the message that I am sharing, or my voice in this field. And so I've kind of had to learn, how do I hold space for their experience? How do I honor their stories? Because their truth is their truth. It's not my story. And so yeah, it's something I find myself continuously having to navigate every day. Even when I was writing my speech for the gala that I'm speaking at next month, you know, it's an honor to be able to share this beautiful story that is mine. And it's a great way to encourage parents to support adoption agencies. But how do I also elevate and amplify stories that are different than mine?
100%. And that's why I loved that you started this conversation saying, this is my story. I don't represent everybody. Or when you've been asked to write from a different perspective, how can you? Because that hasn't been my lived experience. And I love how you said, make space for others and other stories. And I couldn't agree more. I think I wish more people would take that perspective of, I'm talking from my personal story and not try to represent a whole group of people, no matter if it's in the adoption space or any other space, right? There's so much going on in the world right now. And so many times somebody speaks for an entire people, but there's no way. And I personally make space as best as I can, and have to draw the line at just mean and nasty and hate, right? That's what I can't tolerate that. I can't hear it when it's shared in that way. And so I've been ostracized, or I don't know if that's the right word, but hated on publicly too for deleting certain messages. And I've been clear that when it comes to hate and meanness and just spewing your views on other people in a way that isn't doing anybody any good, I have to remove that respectfully. And that's why I bring as many people on this podcast to hear their voices and their stories, because there has to be space for all of it. We can all learn, even if we don't agree, right? What do you think needs to change or improve with, agencies specifically, or just in the world of adoption?
Yeah, I think a few things that I've noticed is, and you kind of started to mention it, Brene Brown talks about the difference between shame and accountability. And I think holding adoption agencies accountable to ways that they could have done adoption better is really important, but shaming adoption agencies by posting comments on social media doesn't elicit accountability. It only causes more hurt. So I think one of the things that I've been trying to do is find a way to hold agencies accountable, but through education and story. And so I think we've done a really good job in the last couple of years learning from the voices of adoptees and allowing adoptees to be at the forefront of conversations around adoptees. And I think that's something that we're starting to do really well.
Mm-hmm.
I also think one of the things, and this is just from my experience in this field, is also adoptive parents really leaning into the support around them. I've noticed just through certain agencies, them telling me that oftentimes parents don't reach out for post-adoption support as much as maybe necessary after adopting, or they're reluctant to share with their children that there's an adoptee support group for adoptees from X, Y, and Z country. And oftentimes what I've heard is that adoptive parents are kind of in the way of some of the things like that. And so I would just say where I would like to encourage parents is to step back and encourage your child to engage in the support services for adoptees. And also the learning doesn't stop after you adopt. And so I think it's really important. I mean, language is constantly changing. I find myself even realizing that how I used to say things is different. Rhetoric around adoption is constantly changing to really honor the members of the adoption triad or constellation. And so I think that's my big thing, is I really just want parents to continue to learn and be in this space even after adopting. I think it's easy to pull back after you adopt and be like, okay, we got this now. And it really is a village of all of the members of the triad and agencies and communities that have adoptees in there to help just cultivate an awareness and understanding of what adoptees need.
Yeah. It's interesting what you just said, because I have a pretty robust community from all of my families, and I've been at this for 11 years now. So hundreds of families. And what I recently just found is that people are not engaging, families are not engaging in the education ahead of time while they're going through the process, unless they have to. Like, they'll do what they have to get approved. And then they think, all right, well, I'm good now. I don't need that now. It's not what's happening in my life. And I've seen a lot of our families come back to start listening to speakers and to start engaging in the conversation. So that's telling me that they're really craving it now. And I do not want to lessen the message that as much as you can do up front, because there's so much to know. And while you're waiting, what a better time than to start engaging in podcasts and speakers and conferences, whatever you can, to soak it all in, because you will need it, and you do need it now. There's so much you don't even realize, that people don't even realize that they don't know. They don't know. And you mentioned something else a couple of times about therapeutic services. And I once heard that an adoptee say that her counselor, her therapist, was one of the most important people in her lives. And that really stuck with me. That was one of those things I learned way back when. you're not going to remember everything, but there's certain nuggets that you will remember. And that was one of them. And so it's been a really big push for me to find the right therapist for my son, for me, so that we had that support. And so you're hitting all of my important buttons too.
Oh, well, I echo that sentiment. I would say my therapist is probably one of the most important people, especially in navigating my own journey. So I think we don't talk enough about mental health services for adoptees. So it's very important to me.
Would you mind sharing? I don't know the answer to this. When did you start therapy? At what age?
Yeah, so I started counseling when I was in 12th grade, and I was,
okay.
Yes, and for me personally, if I could go back and tell my parents, could you do one thing differently, I would have had them put me in counseling in elementary school. They did not know to do that. The conversations around complex developmental trauma, I suffer from depression, and I have since my entire life. I have major depressive disorder, and what really led me to counseling my senior year was I was really struggling. And so it was kind of all right, let's put her in counseling. And I think that my journey would have been incredibly different if I had learned to navigate all of the trauma interlaced in my adoption story and done trauma-informed therapeutic modalities like internal family systems, EMDR. Those are life-changing for me if I had done those years earlier. And I still see the same counselor, 10 years
really?
ago. Yes, I still see her, and it's been great. And yeah, so I just think that's probably one of the most important things that we can do for adoptees is get them in counseling and get them in counseling early, because I had so much I needed to work through, and even language, things that if I had been able to share this in counseling, my counselor could have talked to my parents about, hey, this is why this place isn't safe for Ramya. This is why these people aren't safe for Ramya. This is what she's experiencing. So that is my biggest push for parents.
Okay, when you said that, I got chills all over my body because and it's hard because I always struggle to find, okay, I have to find an adoption competent therapist who also specializes in ADHD, who, and it's not easy to find. And when there's 2 in your community, they're full, right? Or they're 70 and your child is, 10, and are they going to relate or not? So what I finally realized is it's not as important to find the exact right person that has all the credentials more than it is to just start and get them talking. I mean, most people at least basically can deal with all the different issues. And there are services. There are adoption related services in just about every community. One of the things I found when my son was really little, I learned about in Chicago, there was a family services organization who came to your house and did in-home, it was play therapy with your child for free if your child was adopted. So I would get 6 months free, and then I'd have to take a break for X amount of months, and then I could do it again. And you know what? As a single mom, whether that was doing anything for him or not, it certainly helped me. So it was a win-win. And just to have that person in your back pocket and have somebody that your child feels safe with and trusts and can build that relationship. Thank you for that message. I think it's really important for people to hear. Start early and often. What's that from? Do it early and often. I don't know. Do you think people should adopt transracially? Before we go on, we're going to take a quick break, but don't go away. We still have so much to talk about. Hey there, Adoption Roadmap fam. Are you ready to take the next step on your journey to parenthood? If so, head over to our website and take our quiz. It's called, Are You Ready to Adopt? It's not just about testing your knowledge. It's about making sure you're emotionally and practically prepared for the beautiful, complex journey of adoption. Let's make your dream of parenthood a reality. Go to rgadoptionconsulting.com and take the Are You Ready to Adopt quiz today. That's rgadoptionconsulting.com The quiz is free, and it will let you know where you are in the process and if you're ready to jump into your adoption journey. Do you think people should adopt transracially?
Yes, I think.
Such a loaded question.
It's such a loaded question.
I'm throwing it at you.
Yes, I do. I think
this is what you think.
Yes, I think that adopting transracial is necessary. I think that on this side of heaven, transracial adoption is necessary. And so instead of focusing on should people adopt transracially, I think we really need to place a focus on how can we equip parents to adopt transracially well, and how can we support them in this journey, and then how can we support the adoptee.
Amen. You want a hopeful parent to know if they're going to adopt transracially?
There's so much I want them to know, and I think the big ones would be just lean into the support around you. I like what you said about just pre-adoption, all of the ways that you can learn, like to just sit in humility and learn from the voices of those with lived experience. So those are the experiences of birth parents, of other adoptive parents, of adoptees. So just that, it's kind of a posture of humility, being like, I don't know this, but I want to know, I think is really important to me. And then I would also say, acknowledge that you're going to make mistakes, and that's okay. I think adoptees are often reluctant to give grace where mistakes are made, whether that's agencies or systems or parents. And so I would say there's grace for you. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to mess up. Whether you're having biological children or you're adopting, we make mistakes.
100%.
So
we don't know what the heck we're doing.
Just go in with a willingness to figure it out as you go. And you are not alone in the journey. There are people to support you, walk with you, uplift you in this, and there are ways to do it well. And thankfully today, there's an abundance of resources and ways to do it well. Whereas when my parents adopted in 1995, they didn't have those resources, and they didn't know what they were doing, and they didn't know who to reach out to when they needed help. And so,
what did you say? Stand in a space of humility?
Yeah, I often say sit in humility. I think that's something that we talk a lot about in my work. It's just the posture of humility, I think, is really important. Yeah.
That is so powerful. That is so powerful. And a great message for anybody, anywhere in life. What did your parents tell you about their journey to adopting you? Like, did they share their dossier? Did they tell you about the fees? Did they show you the paperwork, or tell you everything that was involved? What did they tell you?
Yeah, great question as well. I was on a meeting the other day with a mom who had adopted transracially, and she is heavily involved in this organization called Culturally Fluent Families. And we were just kind of laughing because people would try to ask me if I knew I was adopted, and I'd just be like, yes, my family's white. So from day one, we talked about adoption with a very positive just approach.
Mm-hmm.
I think in stories where we adopt internationally, there's often not a lot of information surrounding the history of the child. And that was something I really struggled with. So my parents gave me everything that they knew from a very early age. It was developmentally appropriate and maybe built upon as I got older. But recently, actually, my mom gave me, I had always seen it and kind of shuffled through it, but there's just this huge stack of paper that all of my adoption paperwork, so like my birth certificate, and some of it is just paperwork and my medical screening that was done when I was in India. And it's really interesting to have that. It doesn't really tell me anything about my story. I have an unknown history, and it's not accessible information. But I think they've always been transparent with me about what little they knew about my story.
That's so important, because if they start with that openness, it builds such a level of trust between you and them, and really builds a beautiful relationship. What did it feel like for you the first time, even though you knew things, the first time you picked up that stack of paperwork and actually went through it page by page? What did that feel like for you?
I think for me, the hardest thing is feeling incredibly disconnected from certain parts of my story. Like there's this part of my brain that feels like my life started when I was 15 months and I came over at 15 months. And so my life here is all I know. So I think navigating memories that I can't access and just anything that happened prior to my adoption, I feel very disconnected from the first 15 months of my life. And so I'm like shuffling through paperwork and there are documents that are in a language that I spoke when I came over, but I'm not connected to that language. I'm not connected to this culture. It's really an interesting space to be in because I often don't know what to do with that part of my story.
Did you get anything translated?
No, there are documents that are in both, I think the language is Hindi and English. It's more just like, I don't, even just notes from the social worker about the backstory of my biological mom. And there's really only a few sentences, but I just feel incredibly disconnected from that. Like it almost sometimes doesn't feel like me. I'm looking at these pictures. There's maybe 3 or 4 pictures of me in the orphanage. There are no infant pictures of me. The youngest picture we have is I'm 6 months old, which is also kind of a weird feeling. Like, what did I look like when I was born? And there's almost, it doesn't feel like me because I can't remember. I think someone once said, tell your children their stories in ways where you don't have to undo and rebuild them later. And I think I just don't feel like there's a story prior to 15 months that I can access. And so it's just a space I'm still learning to navigate, I would say.
Yeah. And as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking to myself, I don't think I could tell you anything about myself as a baby other than I had big ears, which is something, right? Which is like, I'm sure there's adoptees wishing they knew that they had big ears, when they were a baby. And yet it becomes so much more important for somebody who can't access that.
Or even like your story, like we do this fun thing when I have a big family, whenever we get together for a sibling's birthday, it's always kind of, we're sitting at dinner and we'll be like, what was having Jesse, my brother, like? And my mom will be like, oh yeah, so I went to the hospital and I remember this and I remember this nurse and Jesse was born at this time. And, you can tell the story from the start. And I think even my sister Leah, who's domestic infant adoption, she was born. They were at the hospital or went to the hospital shortly after. I don't have that story, and so there's something that feels very disconnecting. I don't have photo albums of me as a baby with my grandmother holding me like the rest of my siblings do as an infant. There's something, whether or not I remember. Sometimes we create stories through pictures. Of we're looking through old photo albums, and you feel very interconnected to your family. It's just weird for me being a toddler and coming over and not really having the backstory that would make me feel grounded the way other children maybe feel grounded.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. Thanks for clarifying that. So you talking about your siblings and your family dynamics a little bit. Tell us about your family dynamics and how that played out for you.
Yeah, so we're all really close in age and just in general. We do a lot of life together, and that's just a gift. So my older sister Leah was born in 1992 and I was born in 1993, but I didn't come over until I was 15 months old. And then my brother Jesse, my mom actually found out she was pregnant with my brother Jesse about halfway through the adoption process with me. And so I came over March 20th, 1995, and Jesse was born May 31st of that same year. So all of us, my mom used to be asked if she was running a daycare because she had like 3 under 3 and we couldn't look less alike. It was pretty great. The pictures are adorable. So we're all really close. I think we did a lot of life together very early on. And then 3 years later, my mom had my younger sister, Claire Grace. So it's just been really interesting navigating adoption with a sister whose adoption story could not be more different than mine. She has the backstory, she has the paperwork, she has contacts, she's met her birth mom, and I don't have any of that. So I think it's really hard in some ways to have a story that I don't know and having a sister who had all this information. And I remember growing up, I would look at my sister Leah and be like, "You're so lucky you know your birth mom," or "You're so lucky that you get cards on your birthday." And she would say, "You're so lucky you don't know." Because there
Mm.
was, yes, like there is it's a really interesting kind of, I don't know the language around it, but Leah had to navigate a lot knowing her family history and having a relationship with her birth mom and any potential siblings that her birth mom had after. And it's just so it was just kind of, we had very different stories. And while she sometimes wished that she didn't know, I remember doing this thing at my parents' house and I was probably in elementary school and I told them that I did this and they were like so sad. I would sit on the steps and wait to get mail from like my birth mom. I'm not sure why I thought that I was getting mail, but I would just do this thing where I'd sit on the steps and I'd wait for the mail to come. Would have been something that I probably would have shared with a counselor, and that counselor could have shared that with my parents. Another reason we should put our children in counseling.
Mm-hmm.
But it was just the idea of, I really struggled with not knowing, and watching my sister navigate knowing was really interesting.
Did that get in the way of your relationship with her at all? Like, were you jealous? Were you angry? Were you angry at your parents?
I don't think I was ever jealous. I think I was just curious, and I never knew quite what to do with that curiosity.
Interesting. And what about your biological siblings? Like, how did you feel when your mom was pregnant with them, or what's your relationship like with them? Are there any dynamics there that are related to adoption, or how they talk to you or treat you, or the questions they ask? Or
Yeah, there are no weird dynamics. I never remember feeling like there was a favorite or there was any weird dynamic between the adopted children and the biological children. I never remember that. Like, I think, and I am a singular story in this, so I hold space that there are probably adoptee biological sibling relationships that are very complex. For me, I never had that. I remember really enjoying having people to play with growing up. Jesse and I were really close in high school. I think even though I was 15 months old and he was a baby, I still think we both learned to navigate being in the family at the same time. And so I think that made us really close. I also felt like we were also all allies for each other, just in all things, like very protective over each other. I mean, people would often ask me if I was my brother's girlfriend. Like, we would go out somewhere and they'd be like, "Oh, is this your girlfriend?" I'm like, "No, I'm his sister." So yes, I'd be like, "What?" So yes, there were weird ways we had to navigate it, or people would ask my siblings. I would love to do more just questions and just curiosities with them about their experience of having a transracial adoptee in the home, and their experience. But it's been, I think if you ask them, it's been positive, and I think they had to learn how to share their stories as well. And we're all really close, and it's been amazing. So
that's awesome. And that speaks a lot to your parents too. And it sounds like that was able to happen because they've always been so open. And I mean, was there ever a time that you remember your brothers saying, "Well, why are they a different color than we are?" Or anything like that? I'm guessing it was just always talked about. But
yeah, I think one of the things that the social worker told my parents to do after they adopted was to let the children, us as children, tell our stories. Because I just remember growing up, my parents always would have people over at the house for dinner, or would host, or would be at church, and people would be curious about our family stories, because how can you not be when you have 4 children that are just so different looking? And we would tell our stories, and they were really short and sweet. We all had like a little thing that we would say. Leah would say that mom's belly was broken, so she came from her birth mom's belly. I would say I came on a plane from India. My brother Jesse was supposed to say, "Oh, mom's belly got fixed and I came from there." But he would often try to say that he'd be like, "Oh, I also came on a plane from India." And then my little sister, Claire Grace, she always had the best answer. With absolute confidence, she would tell everyone that she came from Narnia. And my mom just was like, "Everyone wants a story. Like saying you came from mom just isn't interesting enough." So the younger two would just come up with something. So I think from the start, we all knew our stories, and there was never any question about where people came from or how they came to this family. It was something we really celebrated. And
maybe that was your siblings' way of saying, screw you, it's none of your business. I'm from Narnia.
yeah, I think they just wanted, I think they wanted a story.
They
as
wanted
well.
something interesting.
Something more interesting.
Yeah. I've heard that a lot. That when there are siblings, one's bio, one that they feel like they need some sort of story too. And
yeah.
Clearly you feel seen and heard by your family. At the beginning, you said you really were very well received. What's the word I'm looking for? It was very well received. Thank you, from the adoption community. What about the regular community? Do you feel seen and heard by like your home community, the different communities you're in? Do you feel seen and heard online, in public?
Yes, I would say that I feel seen and heard, and I don't know that all adoptees can say that. And so I feel really grateful to be able to say that, because I think there's so much importance in that. I also think how I showed up to this space directly influences the ability to be seen and heard. I think I've approached the adoption space with respect and timidness and humility, knowing that my story is drastically different than others. Mm-hmm. So I feel really grateful to be able to share my story and to be able to be in this space doing education and advocacy work. And I do feel that I have something to say and that people are receptive to hearing it.
Yeah, that's great. Reflecting on your life thus far. And how old are you, just for context?
Yes, I turned 30 in December, so I'll turn 31 at the end of this year.
Okay. Have you noticed any recurring patterns or tendencies that may be linked to your experience of adoption, of attachment, of, looking different than your family, anything like that in relationships and friendships?
That's a great question. It's really interesting because something actually happened very recently that was adoption related. So my brother and his wife had a baby exactly a month ago to the day.
Congratulations,
and yes, first baby and first nephew for the sisters. Watching my parents be grandparents is just such a gift.
It's awesome. I remember the first time my sibling had my nephew. Oh, it's the best.
Yeah, it's been so fun to watch just kind of everyone take on new roles.
Yeah.
What's really interesting that I never suspected is the whole process of her going to the hospital and having this baby was so triggering for me. I find that certain life events will stir up proverbial trauma memories of certain things that I can't really access, or just feelings. And I remember when I saw JJ for the first time and he was a few days old, I had never seen a baby that little. And all I could just feel in my body was just this deep sadness of thinking of myself at 4 days old. So my biological mom left me at the orphanage when I was 4 days old. And I'm looking at this baby that's about the same size, I assume, and age that I was when my mom left. And I was just overwhelmed at how could you leave me? Have you seen what a 4-day-old baby looks like? And just the fragility and the dependency on mom and the way we co-regulate with mom. Why do we put babies on their mother's chest and bare skin after they're born? Because we know everything about attachment. And it was so hard for me. And I just was like, I can't be here. I can't do this. I can't hold him. And my parents, pulled me aside a couple days later and they're like, you've been kind of distant. Can you do you want to share anything with us? And I was just really open and said, I am so triggered by all this. I don't understand just how my mom could leave me at 4 days old, and I needed her. And I'm seeing JJ and I'm seeing myself in him. And so it's been really interesting. And it's just, you never really know what life events will stir things up. And I'm sure there will be so many more as I just get older and navigate big things in my own story. But I'm grateful to be able to have language to articulate it. And I think that I have language because I've been to counseling. so I can identify, oh, I'm feeling triggered. I probably need to text my counselor and get in this week, like, so I would say, yes, there are things that stirred up, and I think I'm still learning how to navigate parts of my story and navigate feelings that I have towards my birth mom and the history in which I was brought into this world. And I think that will be something I probably wrestle with for the rest of my life.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. I think that there's really good information in that. And it's so interesting. I never read the book, The Body Keeps Score, but I know the essence of it. And what a perfect example right there. I mean, it just so happened that you had that at 4 days old, and just so happened you knew that about your story. And it's powerful. It's powerful. What offends you when it comes to adoption?
Yeah, that's another great question. It's really interesting because every once in a while I will mindlessly scroll on social media. Terrible for your brain, I know. And it's really interesting when I stumble upon Instagram accounts of parents that are adopting, or I'll stumble upon just random videos of birth moms or just, I don't know. I saw a video the other day, and it was this firsthand story of a mom who was basically sharing that she was going to place her baby for adoption and then changed her mind. And she was very publicly, she made a reel about it and shared it. And I was mindlessly scrolling, stopped, watched the video, and immediately got off Instagram. Every once in a while, I see things. And now that we have social media, again, a great platform on which to provide education and advocacy, but can be very damaging. Mm-hmm. I find there are a lot of things that offend me. It's seeing people be incredibly public about sacred aspects of adoption, mm-hmm. specifically the backstories of their children. Mm-hmm. It's also how we speak about birth parents. And then one thing that I desire so deeply that I mentioned at the beginning of this podcast is I want every single adoptive parent to learn how to hold the tension. And I want, when you post that you're adopting and you're so excited and your 1 million followers are all commenting and liking, that you ask and encourage them to hold space for the loss in your story, because people don't know. And so it really, I think, offends me when I see people talk so positively about adoption and have an unwillingness to provide space to educate. If you're an adoptive parent, you take on the responsibility of doing adoption education and advocacy. And so you take on the responsibility of educating people about adoption. And there's a lot of misconceptions about adoption or myths about adoption. A lot of people learn about adoption through media, which we know is not correct often. And so I think that offends me, is I want to encourage parents to change the way we talk about adoption. And that's kind of what we even talked about, is when we celebrate adoption, can you also just say something about, we're so excited to announce we're adopting. We're also going to sit for a second and honor the fact that while we're so grateful to be welcoming this child, someone is losing this child. And just because so many people don't know, and it's our job to encourage them to hold space. And in holding space and educating them, then we can equip just the community in ways to honor and see the experiences of adoptees.
Yeah. Oh, I was thinking as you were speaking, wouldn't that be so great to change within agencies, right? So when somebody's going through a home study, if the home study provider asks that question, are you willing to advocate and educate others throughout the rest of your life? And if the answer is, I'm not sure, or no, there's either more work to do or you shouldn't be adopting.
Yeah, it's really hard seeing that, especially when I get on Facebook and people will add me all the time on Facebook or Instagram that are adoptive parents, specifically parents that have adopted transracially. And I see the posts they make about their children or their adoption finalization day in court. And I just crave them to add one sentence in there about there's also loss and trauma in this day. So can you also acknowledge that we're celebrating this? We also know that there's loss here.
Yeah. That's beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing all of these. I think that there were a lot of golden nuggets throughout our conversation today. And I wanted to wrap up with some quick fire questions. And the first one is a shout out to a person or an organization that has made a big impact on your life as it pertains to adoption.
I would say my therapist.
Your therapist. I love that. If you could be remembered for one thing, what would it be?
That's a hard one for a rapid fire.
I like to keep you on the toes.
I think that
What's the first thing that comes to mind?
My story, I would say.
You want your story to live on. I love it.
Yeah.
What's a book, movie, or podcast that you're loving right now?
Anything by Brené Brown.
Yes, I noticed that. I love that too. I love her. She's so great. Brené Brown, if you would like to be a guest on this podcast, please, I would be happy to have you. 3 words that come to mind when you think of adoption.
Hope, trauma, restoration.
Thank you so much for being on this podcast. And I ask everybody, if you're listening and this was helpful to you and you took away some golden nuggets, please share it with others who you think could benefit or just to educate. And while you're at it, give us a review. Thanks so much for being here, Ramya. I appreciate you so much. And until next time.
Thank you so much.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode of the Adoption Roadmap podcast. If you did, I have a few favors to ask of you. First, please hit subscribe so you never miss an episode. And while you're at it, I'd love to hear your takeaways. Please write a review and let me know what you liked. And if you have a question or a suggestion on what you'd like to hear, I'd love to hear that too. Please shoot me an email at support@rgadoptionconsulting.com and let me know what you'd like to hear about. And if you have a question, I may just answer it online. Thanks again for listening. Tune in every Wednesday and Friday morning for a brand new episode of the Adoption Roadmap podcast. Until next time, bye-bye.